Hello, and welcome back to the Bakerloo Line in TSW2, featuring the London Underground 1972 stock. We're as you can see, we're in the sidings at Stonebridge Park depot this morning, and we're going to drive a service all the way down to Elephant and Castle. But, of course, first thing to do is actually set up the train. Now, I don't know why the interior lights are always off by default, but at least there's actually no passengers in here, because sometimes you'll see like trains in the sidings that are meant to be empty, and yet they've still got loads of passengers. It's the destination display, Elephant and Castle. Funny, I don't know why this is like why these windows have to be closed before you start moving the train. But, oh well, it's just the way they're designed, I guess. And, yeah, the Bakerloo line comes with the base TSW2 package alongside Sandpatch Grade and Schnellfahrstrecke Köln-Aachen. And fortunately, it's the entire you get the entire Bakerloo line from Elephant and Castle all the way to Harrow and Wealdstone. And in real life, and as it is replicated in the game, not all Bakerloo line services actually go all the way to Harrow and Wealdstone. A lot of them, like the majority of them, actually terminate at Queen's Park, I believe, but a few of them go a little bit further to Stonebridge Park, and then there's the occasional, I forget how frequent the one all the way to Harrow and Wealdstone is. Unfortunately, a lot of the route run, especially north of Queen's Park, runs parallel to the West Coast Main Line, and yet there's absolutely no AI traffic at all on that part of the line. I wonder why this signal is red. Contact signal. Proceed at restricted speed. That's good. I thought it was going to be one of those awful glitches where the signal stayed red and refused to change, even though there would be no other trains in the section ahead of you. I've seen that on the Arosa line, and as far as I know, that glitch still hasn't been fixed, which is pretty annoying. And as a result, I've actually lost a lot of confidence in Rivet games, and that's partly to do with their disastrous West Cornwall route as well. But I'll try to focus more on the underground, especially since that's the subject of the video. I should add that I've also got a couple of mods installed for this route, which is why you're able to, well, one of which now means you can open that door in the front of the cab. Another mod I've got is one where you can hear like a little announcement whenever you open and close the doors, and of course realistic advertisements, because obviously by default all the ones that you see are pretty much fictional. Like I just saw one that on the other platform that looked like it was for IKEA.
Please mind the gap between the train.
And this is Stonebridge Park, and of course in the background there's Wembley Stadium. This above ground section of the Bakerloo line is also shared in real life with the London Overground Watford DC line, and especially if you're like watching trains at like South Kenton further up the line, it would certainly be quite interesting because of the variety of trains that you see. Like, it wouldn't just be the ratty old 1972 stock, but you'd probably also get like, I haven't put the headlights on. It would also be like obviously the London Overground, like either 378s or 710s, and all the other freight and passenger trains that you see on the West Coast Main Line. It's although it's the schedule for us, it says we're meant to be at Elephant and Castle at 10:33, but I don't think we'll get there exactly on time. That looks like a football ground off to the left. Right, I think that building on the right that we've just passed, I'm pretty sure that's the Willesden Royal Mail Terminal, where you would get, like, probably get class, or the funny little class 325 EMUs, which are especially bizarre because I think they might well be the only class of EMU in the UK that doesn't carry, aside from some converted 319s, that don't carry passengers. Or rather, the 325s were the only EMUs that were built right from the start to not carry passengers. They were, I think the 325s have the same body shell, largely the same body shell and traction equipment as the 319s, but for whatever reason the 325s have cabs that are pretty much identical to the networkers, like the 465, for instance. The thing with these 1972 stock units is that their brakes are quite fast in terms of how quickly they slow the train down. But even then, I still find it quite often. I find it quite easy to miss the exact stopping points, and that's something I do generally like to do at these stations, is go and have a quick look in the passenger saloon briefly.
Please stand clear of the doors.
But of course we can never really hang around for too long, because these people rely on us to get to... What's going on with this thing? Yeah, these passengers rely on us to get them to where they need to go in decent time. Although that last part of that statement is somewhat ironic, because obviously we're late. That's partially my fault for not getting the train set up sooner, but also I think Dovetail's fault for when they were setting up the timetable for this route, because as it stands now, especially like when you're like, no matter which end of the line you're starting from, be it in the depot at Stonebridge Park, or in the sidings at Queen's Park, or in the platform at Elephant and Castle, or the reversing siding at Harrow and Wealdstone. Hey look, there's another train. You generally don't get anywhere near enough time to set the train up and be on your way while still remaining on time. And yeah, we're coming up on Willesden Junction, which is a fairly major part of the rail network in London, because there's obviously a huge freight yard here, and of course the West Coast Main Line passes through. But the only trains that stop here are the London Underground and London Overground. Because on these low-level platforms here, these are the ones that are used by the Bakerloo Line and of course the Watford DC line. But the high-level platforms, which I don't think we can actually walk up to, they are used by additional overground services or overground trains on the services from Stratford to Richmond and Clapham Junction. Although saying that, there's one glaring inaccuracy. Those roundels should be orange, and I'm not sure, and I don't get why they're red. But yeah, we really can't hang around for very long here. They only give you like 15 seconds to have the doors open before you have to close them again. Obviously, this is not just like a basic regional service where the timetable is fairly relaxed. It's the Underground is of course famous for being one of the busiest metro systems in the world. It's certainly the oldest underground railway system in the world, because of course the Metropolitan Railway, which is now part of the Circle, Metropolitan, Hammersmith and City lines, between Paddington and Farringdon, that opened in 1863, which is now 158 years ago. Since then, of course, a huge number of cities all over the world have since gone for underground trains. Heck, even Auckland, here in New Zealand, has got Auckland's main central station is underground. or at least the one that opened in 2003. That is, of course, Britomart. And currently in Auckland, they've got what's called the City Rail Link under construction, which is a new section of underground railway that will extend west of Britomart and go through 2 new stations, which I believe are Aotea and Karangahape, before surfacing again at Mount Eden. So in theory, you could run a service from far out west, like Henderson, direct to South Auckland, like Papakura, and passengers wouldn't have to change at Newmarket. Just thinking back to the thing with the underground, how it first opened in 1863. If I'm not mistaken, the first section of the Bakerloo Line first opened in 1906. And I think the line got its name from as a combination of Baker Street and Waterloo. And of course we'll stop at both of those stations today. I need to really start learning to brake a little later so that we can get out of these stations sooner. And this is Kensal Green. Let's have a quick look on the platform.
Between the train and the platform.
Yes, unfortunately you don't get that announcement as standard. Considering
test
that
announcement. This test announcement is made solely to test the equipment. Counting 1, 2, 3, 4.
I think those different announcements are also part of a mod pack that I had installed a while ago. Obviously links to all these mods in the description, of course. That's one thing I've heard a lot of people complain about, well, not necessarily complain about, but just point out that's wrong with this train. Is the motor sounds, which from what I understand are not accurate to the real 1972 stock. From what I understand, Dovetail apparently reused recordings from like the class 455, or well, I think it was the old 455/9 that Thomson Interactive made for Train Simulator many years ago. Come to think of it, we probably could do with a newer, an all-new 455 model in the game. Not just Train Simulator, but of course you could make like the refurbished Southern 455 for the London commuter route, because that would make it look a lot more realistic than just having 377s running every single Southern service on that route. Because obviously the 377s, while they are a very common part of Southern's fleet, they do also use 455s on the local services throughout South London and down to places like Caterham or Tattenham Corner. And pretty soon we'll be, as we're now approaching Queen's Park, pretty soon we'll be leaving the Watford DC line behind and then going underground, as the song, which is coincidentally going underground is also the name of a song from The Jam. Speaking of which, I remember Dad. I think my dad is quite a fan of like some of these late 1970s English rock bands, like obviously The Jam, The Clash, Dire Straits. Even though Mark Knopfler wasn't a Londoner, he was a Geordie. But no, I remember recently I think I've watched seen him watching like some of Paul Weller's live performances quite often, and I didn't realise until quite recently that Paul Weller was also in a band called the Style Council. Just gone through that funny little train shed where they also have the reversing sidings. And as I stated earlier, the majority of the Bakerloo Line services do terminate here at Queen's Park, and they have those 2 reversing sidings where they pull forward, then the driver changes ends, and they just head back. So that presumably that means that Queen's Park to Elephant and Castle is the busiest section on the line, especially since all Bakerloo Line services use that section.
Please mind the gap
And that score is a DC's number, 4565. And from what I've seen, like in real life photographs, this is a reasonably accurate rendition of Queen's Park Station. Although, I'm pretty sure that these platforms in real life that would only be used by overground trains would not have this fourth rail, that there would just be third rail. So that's one area where Dovetail got it slightly wrong.
Please stand clear of the doors.
There's another shed with reversing sidings just there in front of us. There's a couple of services in timetable mode that actually start from there, which is always fascinating. Because usually when you start a new shift, or as it were, it's either at like London Road Depot or Stonebridge Park, or possibly even in the reversing sidings at Elephant and Castle. Now, hoping I can get the timing right, because I'm going to try and get a screenshot of the train going down this section into the tunnels. And there's another train. Probably make for a more enticing screenshot, methinks. And now we're in the actual underground section. So this won't be a lot to see, of course. Although come to think of it, there's only like 2 lines on the underground on this network that are entirely underground, which are the Victoria Line and the Waterloo and City Line. And of course the Bakerloo Line has interchanges with both the Victoria and Waterloo and City. Because I think we meet the Victoria Line at Oxford Circus, and then of course the Waterloo and City Line at Waterloo. Of course there's also that strange conundrum where with Charing Cross and Embankment, and how they're very, very close together. And also, when we get out, when we stop the train here at Kilburn Park, I'll just point out a major issue with the destination displays. And yes, I'm aware that we're 4 minutes late. At least I think it's 4 minutes.
Please mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Silly announcements. So, we're on the southbound platform here, and yet the destination display, for whatever reason, is for the northbound side. I think Dovetail must have modelled the station wrong, and I don't know how they could have missed that, or like how they could have missed the destination displays being on the wrong side. And I've seen this at least one other station, but I can't remember which one. These trains take longer to accelerate than I remember. Well, they take longer to get moving than I remember, but so presumably it's just because of how old they are. Alright, we've still got quite a few stations to go through, even though it's a fairly short. It's only about 6 3/4 miles between Queen's Park and Elephant and Castle. Incidentally, although the current Bakerloo line is just that one linear branch, well, it's not really a branch, just that one linear route between Elephant and Castle and Harrow and Wealdstone, it wasn't always like that. No, I think originally the Bakerloo line used to have the branch line from Baker Street to Stanmore as well. But in 1979, that section was switched over almost and transferred to the Jubilee line. Although, because I remember that the only new, and yes, I've completely missed that stop. The only really new part of the Jubilee line, like the only newly built section was, I believe it was between Baker Street and Charing Cross, which I think it also had stations at Green Park and Bond Street.
Please stand clear of the doors.
And of course, in the 90s, towards the end of the 90s actually, they opened the extension to Stratford, and of of course the Jubilee line doesn't go to Charing Cross anymore, although the old platforms are still there. And I think on the northern side of the Bakerloo line platforms at Baker Street, you do actually go through the old connection to the Stanmore branch. And I can't imagine that these 1972 stock trains would be able to run on the Jubilee line anymore, because last I heard the Jubilee uses automatic train operation. So the 72 stock would be completely incompatible with that system. And of course these days the Jubilee line uses the 1996 stock, which just for the motor sound, the sound of the motors alone, 96 stock is one of my favourite London Underground trains. As are the 1972 stock. Although the reason I like these trains is because they're over 40 years old, and yet they're still in service on a busy underground line in the English capital. Well, not just England, but just the UK as a whole. But obviously, London is in England. And yeah, it is impressive that they're still using such old trains. Although I dare say TfL would probably like to replace them before too long, because obviously they won't. I dare say they won't last forever. Although, from what I heard, these 72 stock units actually got, not long ago, they apparently got some kind of refurbishment that would mean they could keep running until at least 2035. And I think they'll eventually be replaced by something called the New Tube for London. And from what I've seen, like CGI renders, that thing doesn't look all that good. If anything, it looks just about as bad as the new Stadler built rolling stock for the Glasgow subway. Speaking of the Glasgow subway, that's another route that's another line that I wouldn't mind seeing in TSW. Even though that line is literally just a double track underground loop in the centre of Glasgow, that I think it is just that one loop, and there's no branch lines or anything. Although there is, of course, that branch off to the depot, I think down near Govan Cross, or Govan, I think it's just called Govan now. So I think before the line was refurbished in the 1970s, the station was just called Govan Cross. Of course, this is Paddington, where you can change to the 3 of the 4 subsurface lines. Obviously, that's the Circle, H&C, and District. And you can there's also the mainline station here, where you can catch Great Western Railway, or Heathrow Express, or TfL Rail.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
That noise you can hear is from the other train that we just saw as we were coming in. Paddington's honestly my least favourite station on the Bakerloo line, because of the very windy curves, like very almost sharply curved platforms, and of course this speed limit. And normally I think in some other stations the speed limit through there is about 30 miles an hour. Although to me 30 miles an hour does still seem pretty fast for a train that's travelling in a very very cramped and enclosed environment. And I remember that one of the things the underground trains are known for, especially the deep level lines like the Bakerloo here, is that they can get very, very, very hot and stuffy, especially in summer. And apparently it's to do with heat being essentially absorbed by what's called the London clay that surrounds the tunnels. And it's almost like an insulator or incubator, or I wouldn't be surprised if some people think the tube is like a sauna on hot days. But no, this is Edgware Road. Although, despite its name, this Bakerloo Line station at Edgware Road is actually, well, from what I understand, it's actually physically separate from the station for the Circle and District lines.
Please mind the gap between the train and the platform.
You can just about see in the tunnel, just down the tunnel there, I think that's, I can just about see what looks like the platforms at Marylebone, which is which is an interchange with the National Rail station, which is of course also called Marylebone, and that station is the London terminus for Chiltern Railways. There's actually quite a lot of stations on this route where you can, where there's interchanges with National Rail, and of course other underground lines. Yes, I'm going to try and slow down a little bit later for future stations, although as it stands now I think we've pretty much got no hope of arriving at Elephant and Castle on time. So I think Dovetail really do need to sort out the when you load into a service in timetable mode, so that you do have plenty of time to set up the train before having to leave, so that you should still be able to make it on time. That's the other thing with these tube trains, is that because of how long they are, in this case the 72 stock or 7-car trains, you generally always have to stop right at the end of the platform.
Please mind the gap between the train and the platform.
What does that advert say? Connecting every part of you or London. That means nothing to me, since I don't live in London. Although I'm not sure if I'd actually want to, because of how big and busy the city is.
Stand clear of the doors.
That's the other thing I just realised. I'm pretty sure that tube drivers wouldn't actually use the whistle when they're in the tunnel. I think in real life they only use them for like yard or shunt, other reversing siding movements or what have you. Yeah, the next station, of course, is Dewey Rafferty song, and pretty soon, any minute, we will be going through that old connection to the line to Stanmore. Although I can't imagine they'd still use it anymore. And of course, Baker Street is famous, as you just saw there, for being, in the novels by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Baker Street is apparently the residence for one Sherlock Holmes. Or is it Holmes? I honestly don't know. And of course this station is also served by it's not just served by the Bakerloo line, but also the Circle, Metropolitan, Hammersmith and City and Jubilee lines. In fact, if you go out onto look, on the banners here, on the platform banners here, you can see the mention of the other 4 lines. But I really do need to get a move on.
Please stand clear of the doors.
And the next station is Regents Park, which apparently is the station you want to go to if you want to go to London Zoo. Although apparently I heard somewhere that Camden Town on the Northern Line is actually closer to London Zoo than Regents Park. But no, after Regents Park we've got Oxford Circus, which is the interchange with the Circle and Victoria lines, then Piccadilly Circus, interchange with the Piccadilly, then Charing Cross for National Rail and the Northern Line, then Embankment for the Northern, Circle and District lines, and Waterloo for National Rail, and before 2007 the Eurostar, but now it's just National Rail as well as the Northern, Jubilee, Waterloo and City lines. And then lastly, and then there's Lambeth North, and finally Elephant and Castle. From what I understand, Lambeth North is served exclusively by the Bakerloo Line, but Elephant and Castle is also served by National Rail, more specifically the Thameslink Class 700 trains, and it's also a stop on the Northern Line. There's certainly a lot of big and important and busy interchanges in central London, especially on the Victoria Line. Heck, there's only one station on rather famously, there's only one station on the Victoria Line that does not have any interchanges,
Please mind the gap between
and that
the
is of
train
course
and the platform.
Pimlico. I do like how Dovetail managed to fairly accurately represent all the all these like unique details that some of the stations have, like obviously the tile work here at Regents Park, and the next at Piccadilly Circus. That's probably
Stand clear of the doors.
Piccadilly Circus is probably my favourite station on the line, just because, well, partly because of the really fancy tile work, which we will see before too long, and of course up at the northern end of the Bakerloo Line platforms, so like the front of northbound trains or the back of southbound trains, there's like a bit of the tunnel where it's actually kind of open, like there's no wall between the two tracks, so it's certainly an unusual sight. Regarding the London Underground being in TSW2, it's certainly impressive to me, especially since for the longest time Dovetail never did anything to do with the Underground. And now here they are with a fully licensed recreation of the 1972 stock and the Bakerloo Line. Although, of course, as is always the case with these TSW routes, there's a lot of room for improvement, because this is certainly not a perfect rendition of the Underground, or the 72 stock at least, because as I pointed out earlier, the motor sounds are completely inaccurate. And there's also the fact that this thing does not have working announcements, despite the fact that they have modelled the little keypad and little control thing there for the announcements. That setup there looks very much like what I remember seeing on the old C stock in World of Subways 3, which was a recreation of the Circle Line as it was before the S stock arrived. And you also get an AI only rendition of the D78 stock that you see on the section between Aldgate and around Gloucester Road. From what I understand, even though the D78 stock units exclusively ran on the Districts line,
Please mind the gap between the train and the platform.
they didn't run up to Edgware Road because they were too long for the platforms. You fancy a door in your face? Well, now you've got one. You'd think that there would be a lot more passengers on this train, considering that the London Underground is notorious, or can often fall victim to overcrowding. And of course the next stop is Piccadilly Circus, which is I believe, as I said earlier, that's where you can change for the Piccadilly line. So that would mean that at Piccadilly Circus you would get both of the oldest, or the two oldest types of trains on the Underground, because the Piccadilly line is run with 1973 stock, heavily refurbished 1973 stock, of course, because when they were first built they were unpainted aluminium with a small area of red paint on the cab ends, kind of like the 1972 stock when they were brand new. I don't particularly like going down this section between Oxford Circus and Piccadilly Circus, because basically the whole time you're going down a pretty steep gradient, which can get as severe as about 1 in 60, and the speed limits are not very high. Yeah, look at this. Like, this is so bizarre, seeing like the northern end of the tunnel. The northern end of the tunnel completely open. Although I think if you were going to film Bakerloo Line, if you were going to do train spotting with the Bakerloo Line here, you'd probably my advice would be to stand at the just stand at the northern end of the northbound platform, because then you'd probably get the best angle. But as I said earlier, this tile work, or as I pretty much alluded to earlier, this tile work is pretty incredible.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
And as far as I know, this is how it is in real life. Although I would have thought that the tiles would be like blue, or like dark blue and brown. Especially because if you look here, you'll see that obviously they've got red and green, even though neither the central nor district lines serve Piccadilly Circus.
Stand clear of the doors.
Wait, did I just open the doors on the wrong side? Oh, for God's
Stand
sake.
clear of the doors.
God, I'm stupid. Oh well, we can still continue, even though we are very late. Wonder how the real underground trains are with punctuality. From what I understand, TfL don't really publish timetables for the tube. I think it's more of a, especially on the Victoria line at least, it's more of just a turn up and take one situation. Although I think, as Jeff Marshall has pointed out, apparently if you look hard enough, you can find working timetables, even for the Victoria line. Although you'd have to sift through a lot of services there, considering that the Victoria line can get up to like 36 trains an hour in the peak. What I'm saying. Yeah, now we're coming up on Charing Cross, which is, from what I understand, I think the roundels on there say that you can say Charing Cross for Trafalgar Square. So yeah, good. Obviously that's a good thing. I dare say there'd be quite a lot of these famous London landmarks that are close to underground stations. Like, I think Westminster, for example, on the Jubilee, Circle and District lines.
Between the train and the platform.
I mean, look, just down there, you can... The embankment is so close that you can actually see the sodding thing. But, yeah, so... All I remember about Trafalgar Square, from what I've seen in pictures, is there were loads of pigeons for some reason. I honestly don't know what the significance is with pigeons in Trafalgar Square, especially since I remember there was a Dad's Army episode in which Private Walker tried helping out Corporal Jones with his butcher shop by getting a huge amount of off-the-ration meat, which all turned out to be pigeons. And there was a scene and it turned out that when Captain Mannering and some of the men were in what I think some kind of air raid shelter with sandbags all over the place, they had the wireless radio going, and it broke the news that apparently, and from what I gather, it seemed as though Private Walker got in a lot of trouble, or was threatened to be in a lot of trouble, after he apparently stole pigeons from one of his criminal mates. Essentially stole pigeons from Trafalgar Square. Anyway, this is Embankment, which is... what is that? Huh? Not sure what that's about. I mean, I obviously know what Brexit is, but I'm not sure what booze has got to do with it.
Please stand clear of the doors.
Haven't got long to go now. Just got Waterloo, Lambeth North and Elephant and Castle. Incidentally, this section between Embankment and Waterloo is where we actually go under the River Thames. Of course, Waterloo, famous for being, I think, the busiest railway station in the UK. Something like 90 or 98 million passengers a year, which is insane. I'm surprised they can manage all that lot. Although I dare say it'd be largely like it'd be a mix of people commuting in from places like Guildford and Hampton Court, or like Alton, I guess. Not Alton Towers, of course. Alton in, I think, Hampshire or Surrey. I forget which one it is. Might be Hampshire. And then, of course, you've got, like, I guess, regional travellers coming in from places like Weymouth, Bournemouth, or Southampton. Heck, I wouldn't mind betting that there could be some, for all I know, there's probably people that live in, like, Bournemouth or Southampton, but work in London and catch the train every day. In which case, I dare say they'd probably be quite familiar with the Class 444s or 450s. Although I'm pretty sure they do. The main motive power for the London Waterloo to Weymouth services is the 444s. That's semi-reflective. Doesn't work out all that well. Well, I can't imagine how you'd be able to simulate reflections realistically. Oh well.
Please stand clear of the doors.
I kind of wish these tube trains had doors, like had windows in these vestibule doors, so that passengers could, if like mildly curious passengers could stand there and look out the front window. I remember like the old Gans Marvag electric trains in Wellington. Whichever end of those two-car units you were at, you could very easily see out the front and almost get like a driver's perspective. I mean, there was one time where, I mean, if memory serves, there was one time I think where I actually got to ride up front in what is essentially the cab with the driver. And when you're on like the Gans Marvag trailer car or the ET, which was always marshalled at which was always facing north, and the EM motor car was also always facing south. When you were sat in the ET, if you got right up front, you could just sit in a normal passenger seat right across from the driver's little cubicle. It's not really a cab, but yeah, you could sit there right up front and get a pretty good view out of the track in front of you. But then the EM motor cars, I think they had kind of a large luggage compartment, like the southern end, for bikes and big suitcases or something of that nature, I think. So at the southern end, it was a little bit harder to get the driver's view, but if you were lucky, you could sometimes. Heck, I think there was one time I actually got to, ride in that compartment just across from the driver on a southbound run from Waikanae. And the last time I actually did ride on a Gans Marvag unit was, I think, in early 2016. It was a relatively short trip from Waikanae down to Pukeroa Bay. And quite coincidentally, almost as soon as I got off the train at Pukeroa Bay, but a DFT 7145 came speeding through with a Capital Connection, which is that weekdays only commuter service from Wellington to Palmerston North. Yeah, so obviously we're very close to the end of the line now, on the approach to Elephants and Castle, and I like to think next time I try driving on this line I will be a little better with punctuality, because obviously getting on for 6 minutes late is pretty dire, especially for the underground. But no, I do hope that you've enjoyed this journey down the Bakerloo line today, despite the fact that I am not a particularly interesting presenter. But yeah, I pretty much invite you to, if you like, you can stick around for more videos like this, where I'm just rambling on while driving a train. Although I do tend to make more like fancier edited videos, but that's not to say these ones are bad. I see we're going over the crossovers. So I guess they would just alternate between whichever platform to use, because obviously here at Elephants and Castle, because this is a terminus, both of these platforms are technically for northbound trains, like at Brixton, at the southern, which is at the southern end of the Victoria line. That's weird. I just saw a strange glitch there on the side of the, on like the wall texture. Not sure what's going on there. Yes, I certainly could have done better with punctuality, but better late than never, I suppose. And there you have it. That has been my efforts to drive the 1972 tube stock from Stonebridge Park all the way down to Elephant and Castle. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.